This is Join Us in France, episode 322. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and today I bring you a conversation with two people, Carolyn Gates and Julia Maurice, about growing old in France. Even if you have no intention of ever moving to France, it's good to understand how things work in other countries, right? But, in fact, a lot of my listeners would love to move to France someday. And if you move to France and all goes well, you'll grow old in France. What options will you have then? We'll explore three things that typically happen as a person grows old in France. Number one, that person stays in their own home. That's obviously the most desirable option, and there are a lot of things in France to make that possible. I don't think that's the case in many other countries, so that's where France shines, I think. Number two, that person moves into a résidence de senior or something of the sort. That's what you would call a retirement community in America. Options are still limited in France, but there are some, and it's developing, so I'll mention that. Number three, that person needs full-time help and has to move into a long-term care facility that can be more or less medicalized. Those are the types of things I discussed with my guests, so I'm not going to say very much about it. If you like what we do here at Join Us in France, consider supporting us by going to patreon.com/join us, Patreon, join us, no spaces or dashes. I had a bumper crop of new patrons this week, and I will thank them after the interviews. And if you'd like to check out my book and my tours or see my list of faves on Amazon, go to joinusinfrance.com/boutique. Show notes for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/322, where you will see a recap of what we've discussed, as well as links to relevant resources. And you can follow Addicted to France on Instagram to see the photos of the types of facilities we discuss in this episode, including some inside of the retirement community and EHPAD I visited this week. It'll give you a good idea of what we're talking about. And I'll post them this week. It's at Addicted to France on Instagram. And of course, the best way to stay in touch with me and with the podcast is to sign up for the newsletter at joinusinfrance.com/newsletter. And this week I'm switching providers. And so the next newsletter you get, it might look weird on your reader. All you have to do is just click display images and it'll fix it. It's magic. Let's talk about growing old in France. My attitude is, this is what happens if all goes well. So let's make it the best we can, shall we? Most French people spend their golden years at home. And to do that, here's a few things to think about. I think that with a little bit of preparation, you can remain in your own home for a good long time. You need to age-proof your home. If you're renovating a home in France, make sure it will meet your needs as you age. Steps are usually a problem because even if you don't lose the ability to go up and down stairs, you could break a toe or have a hip pain that will make it difficult. So that's something to think about. At least have a bedroom on the ground level, right? That would be good. If you're renovating your home as well, ask yourself, can I make the doors a little bit wider? Because typically doors in French homes are pretty narrow. What happens if you need to be in a wheelchair? Again, hopefully the wheelchair will only be temporary because people break legs. So talk to the people doing the work for you and ask them how you can make your home as accessible as possible. Bathtubs are also a problem, okay? Showers that are as close to ground level as possible are a big deal. Another thing to consider is I would recommend you don't buy a place in the total boonies where there are no services and little to do. That's the biggest problem, is little to do. You may have noticed that with COVID, the less we do, the less motivated we are to do things. And I think the same happens to people who move to really remote places. They get used to not doing much. They get used to doing the bare minimum, and that's not so good for you. So those are the two things I would urge you to consider is, renovate in a way that you can age-proof your home and don't go just way off. Okay. Another thing that you will need if you move to France is to get a carte vitale. That should be one of your highest priorities. That's to get into the French medical insurance system. When you do that, you get a carte vitale, which is a little green card with your photo on it and a chip. And it's your health insurance card. It doesn't have a lot of data, but it keeps track of who your general practitioner is. Yeah, I think that's it, is who your general practitioner. I'm not sure. Anyway, but that's really important to have. It bears repeating that in France, it's the health insurance. That's the national program. Most doctors, nurses, pharmacists are in business for themselves. So it's not socialized medicine, it's socialized insurance. All of these doctors who are private providers take the national healthcare card, and so they agree to charge set fees. That's how healthcare is so cheap in France, both for the people in the system and the people who are not. French doctors are paid well, but nothing like American doctors. You don't see a French doctor in a Ferrari. No. You see them in a nice Toyota or something. Or a nice, what's the new car that French people love? The Peugeot 308 or something. It's like more of a... It's like a RAV4. It's like a small SUV. Anyway, the fact that the government negotiates standard rates forces doctors to charge reasonable amounts. They can ask for more, but only a few doctors get away with getting paid a lot more. So how do you get the card? I got my carte vitale when I moved home to France and registered a business. My husband got his through his job. Our daughter got hers through her university. But that's not the only way. Folks who retire in France get this card all the time. There is a process. I'm sure it's convoluted and will give you a headache, but it can be done and it should be a priority. I'll put some links to resources that look legit in the show notes, and you want to see them, especially the one from the official site. And when you get to that one, you need to enter a valid French zip code before you can do anything else. But once you've entered the zip code, it will remember that zip code forever. So just to let you know. Even if you don't get the health insurance card, you can pay out of pocket. And in France, everything is a lot cheaper than in America. A visit to the doctor's office is 25 euros in France. Specialists usually charge 55 euros for a visit. For a while, I needed a monthly shot. So a nurse came to my home to do it. And I think I paid 7 euros for that home visit for my shot. A cleaning at the dentist is $28.92. I just checked. It's really cheap. Now, crowns are not covered very well in France, and you pay usually around 1,000 out of pocket. I don't know about implants because I don't have any, but I assume it's going to be, 1,000 and up, probably. Fancy glasses, meaning, the stuff with bifocals, but that don't look like bifocals. I don't know what they're called. Glasses for your computer or whatever, thinner glasses, whatever. They'll run you between 500 and 800. So glasses and teeth are not covered so well, but everything else is, okay? What's extraordinary about healthcare insurance in France is that it's a care system. I know a couple of people who are getting chemo right now. When you have chemo, you have to get to the hospital to do that treatment, and you're going to feel really, really sick, probably. We have a whole system of medical taxis in France. A medical taxi will show up at their home to take them to the hospital, and then will come back to take them home a few hours later when they're done with the treatment. And they don't just drop them off in front of the hospital door. They take them right to where they need to go. So those people are wonderful. I see them all the time when I go do consults at doctors' offices. I haven't ever used one of their services, but my father has, and it's really very, very good. Those are not necessarily ambulances. It could be a regular car, but the driver has been trained to assist people to get in and out of the car if needed. And they know the hospitals and the clinics like the back of their hands. So they can take you right to where you need to go. And they also have preferred parking. So it's perfect. That alone helps people age in their homes. They don't have to worry about who's going to drive them to medical appointments if they can't drive. Their kids don't have to worry about that. They can just set it up to have a medical taxi. And once you have a general practitioner in France and they know you and they know your needs, they will give you a voucher for a medical taxi as needed. Same things with getting blood drawn. The phlebotomist can come to your home if it's clear that the patient can't go to him or her. I remember making the call to a phlebotomist saying, my dad was very unwell. He needed to get some blood drawn. And I didn't even have to ask. The person knew my dad, knew he was old, knew that if I was calling, it was that something was up. And then I explained anyway. And he just said, I'll come do it. What's the address? What's the code to get into the building? That's how it works. Doctors can come do home visits. It's restricted to specific circumstances, but it's possible with elderly patients, and it happens all the time. One more thing that's really fabulous about the French health system, the insurance system that we have, is that we have great home nurses in France. They're called infirmières indépendantes, so independent nurse. If you have surgery in France and you need bandages changed, a nurse will come to your home to do it. If you need wound care for any reason, a nurse will come to your home to do it. I mentioned the monthly shot. I called my local nurse and arranged it. In my village, there are 3 nurses that go around taking care of people at home for our village. How it usually happens is that one or more nurses set up a practice as infirmière indépendante, so independent nurse. They have to have office hours. You can go and get taken care of right there, or they can come to you. If you're young and valid, they usually ask you to come to them, obviously, You can find them by searching for cabinet d'infirmière and your zip code online, and they are everywhere. It's really good to have a good relationship with these nurses as you get older, because you might need them, okay? My father needed a lot of nursing care, and my mother hardly needed any. So it really depends on the person. For my father, it started in his 70s he had a leg wound that did not heal, and he had bad circulation in his legs, and so there you go. They changed his bandage a few times a week, right? After my mother died and he was living alone, I noticed that he was really getting confused about his medications. So I talked to his nurse, and she said, just get a prescription from his doctor and we'll do the pills for him every week. It was never a problem after that. They kept an eye on it and he was fine. Every time he needed more care from a nurse, we talked to his doctor about it. The nurse usually told us, look, he needs help with this or that. And so we talked to the doctor. The doctor wrote a prescription detailing what was needed. The nurses took care of it. I was proactive, as most kids are with their parents. And I went to see the doctor with him also because my dad was a weird guy. He would just tell his doctor that everything was fine when it really wasn't. So I went with him and just disclosed a lot of things to the doctor that my dad wouldn't have. We managed that way. Later in the game, it came to the point where he couldn't lift his arms or bend down. So a nurse came to him to give him a shower twice a week at home. He wasn't happy about it at all. But you've got to do what you've got to do. And I, as his daughter, wasn't about to do that. The nurses do it. They do it every day. They do a good job at it. They're professionals. It's fine. It's fine. If the nurses hadn't been there, he would have had to go to a facility a good 5 years before it came inevitable for medical reasons. We chose to give his nurse, the group of nurses that took care of him, a key to his building and to his apartment. They were in and out a lot. They called us if they had any questions or concerns. All these nurses in private practice in France are a gem. You can also get meals delivered for a nominal fee. A cleaning person can come help you out. My father he wasn't rich, he had normal retirement income for an electrician, right? And he was a cheap person. He wouldn't have paid for any of these services out of pocket because he was cheap. He could have, but he wasn't going to. So that's a problem, by the way. If you can afford it, you should hire the people you need in your retirement, in your old age. Anyway, we talked to a social worker, and we also have a lot of social workers in France, and they looked into it and told us all the things that he could qualify for. We had to do the paperwork. There was a lot of paperwork, but you do it. And even if you can't qualify to get it for free with our health insurance, those services are totally affordable. Why? Because the government negotiates all these rates. So save your pennies and use them well to hire help when you need it. Elderly French people can also get assistance to go do their shopping. When you go to a store in France, you may notice an elderly person doing their shopping with a much younger helper who says vous to them. So that's not their grandkid, okay? That's a person who's getting paid to go to the store with them, walk with them, keep them active as long as possible. Is it expensive? No, for most of them, it's free. But even if you paid for it, it wouldn't be that much money. And again, it's the family doctor who writes a prescription saying this person needs to get help getting out of the house to go do whatever it is. Usually they will try to find something. Usually they try to hit two birds with one stone. So you need food, so we'll go do grocery shopping. But they also try and take them to the park or to whatever that this person might enjoy to keep them moving. Right now, a lot of that is not happening because of COVID-19. And that's a problem because a lot of these older people are just, staying home way too much. It'll start up again, but I think it's really important to keep doing daily tasks when you get old. And you need a good family doctor who cares and is willing to help you stay in your home as long as possible. And that doctor is going to really make your life much, much nicer. I went to nursing homes this week in preparation for this episode, and it renewed my resolve to stay active and independent for as long as I can. I know best laid plans don't always work out, but I will do my part to stay home as long as I can. And I'm not that old. And for the rest, I'll rely on the great services made affordable by the French health insurance system. Now, let's talk about résidence ou village pour seniors. Those are pretty new in France. New, last 5 years, okay? If you want to find one, you can go on Google and type résidence senior or something like seigneurial or papy loft. I thought that was cute. Or résidence service senior. These are retirement communities, okay? These are for people who are valid, who can move around and do all sorts of things, but they would like to simplify their lives and live somewhere to be around like-minded people. I have a lot of links on joinusinfrance.com/322. Also, but I want to warn you, okay, a lot of these résidences pour seniors, they have salespeople, okay, and as a matter of fact, when I knocked on the door on one, and I kind of told a little white lie. I said I was looking for a home for my dad, and unfortunately, I wasn't. But they showed me around, and they gave me the whole tour and whatever is how I got the photos. And when I left, they gave me a care package. They gave me a whole bag with all sorts of information, and they gave me a sleeve full of macarons and a bottle of Badois. It was cute. I felt embarrassed because, yeah, but they have salespeople, so those websites, some of them, they won't tell you very much without capturing all kinds of information from you, So these places are like you rent an apartment in a building that's full of older people who have moved in there because they want to feel safe. They have people there to keep an eye on them. So I walked in and it's like a nice hotel, okay? It's like not a super fancy hotel, but a well-appointed hotel. So they have a small exercise room. They have a heated pool. They have a restaurant. With a nice dining room, and they even have a side dining room that you can reserve if you want to invite your family. Now, for the restaurant, you just pay for the restaurant. That's separate from your rental. The apartments are all about 40 square meters, and you pay more. This is just funny. You pay more depending on how well situated the apartment is. So the closer to the road, the less you pay. And if you're on the south side, you pay more than if you're on the north side. I don't know how to compare it in America because a lot of things are more lavish in America. But if you go in France, if you go to a Novotel with a decent lobby, nothing too lavish, and just a well-appointed hotel, the elevator, the halls, it just looks like a hotel. And the bedrooms are, it's pretty small. So if you were to move into something like that, you really need to come with just a suitcase, okay? You don't want to take too much, bring too much, because you won't have any room for it. It works for a lot of people. Now, and there are actually a few places in France, this is just starting, where it's a whole village full of retired people. So, it's happening in France. I won't say that most French people seem to be wild about it, but there's some good things about them, So what they do is they make you qualify before you can rent. So you need to have a certain level of income. Here in the one I saw, you would need to have 2,500 euros in retirement income every month before they would rent you the cheapest room the cheapest apartment that they have. They want, so their apartments go between 1,400 euros a month to almost 2,000 euros a month, but they want you to have 750 for extra costs, for your apartment, whatever. And they don't care how much you have saved. They want monthly income. So this is very, very French. When you buy somewhere in France, for instance, they couldn't care less how much you have saved up in the bank. They want to know how much income you bring in every month from your retirement or somewhere safe like that. So it's that sort of income. So obviously, my dad, for instance, he wouldn't have qualified. His retirement wasn't big enough for that. He had plenty of savings, but not his retirement. So in a way, it puts you in a group of people that are better off, that probably they were doctors and lawyers and engineers and professionals. Otherwise, they wouldn't have that sort of higher retirement income. So I'll give you plenty of links for that, and feel free to look around as much as you'd like. All right, and the third place you can go to as you get old in France, and unfortunately that's still a lot of elderly French people who need help when they get old. That's where they go. It's called an EHPAD. It stands for Établissement d'hébergement pour personnes âgées. So it's EHPAD is how you spell it. And that's what my guests, Carolyn and Julia, are going to talk about. So I'll just play what they had to say about it because they have more experience with it than I do. As I mentioned when I was chatting with them, my dad had to he went from being at home to needing to be in a hospital for several months, and then stepped down to a very highly medicalized EHPAD because he was in renal failure, and so he couldn't move. It was not a good way to go. Anyway, so now let's listen first to Carolyn and then Julia, who will tell you all about it. Bonjour, Carolyn. Welcome to Join Us in France. Thank you so much for talking to me about your experience with growing old in France. So why don't you introduce yourself just a little bit?
Okay. So I'm originally from Maryland, and I've been in contact with France for about 30 years, and I moved here in 2001. I'm a binational. I have 3 children, and my husband is French.
Okay. Excellent. And you have some experience with the French healthcare system, obviously.
Yes, certainly.
And about what it's like to grow old in France. You have a relative, right, who is in a care facility right now.
That's right. Both of my parents-in-law are alive. My father-in-law is in a care facility for Alzheimer's.
Ah, so talk about what that's like for him and for you.
So he went into this care facility about 18 months ago. It's in a CHU, so it's a hospital center. It's in a city center, and the total number of patients in the care facility is about 120, and 20 of those are Alzheimer's patients.
Okay. Yeah, so this is similar to what happened to my father, who's since passed away. He was in a CHU EHPAD as well. So
right.
when they need a lot of care, it's actually integrated in the hospital system. It's usually a building not too far from the hospital, I would assume.
Yes, exactly.
Right. And then they have access to specialists and, all the medical help that they need. But this is kind of an extreme, most people don't require that level of help, but some do.
Right.
And it's good to know that we have it.
Yes.
So your father-in-law is completely in the French healthcare system anyway, right?
That's right. He's French. He was actually a English professor, so there was some linguistic issues. I can tell you that there was a long waiting list to get into the care center. Yeah,
that was the same with my father.
Yeah,
yes.
He waited about 12 months when he needed care, and his care was it was at home, but it was very difficult before that. It actually took a medical emergency to put into the top of the list to get in.
Right.
There was there was a lot of paperwork to be done, and he was on several waiting lists before he got into this facility.
Right. There's not enough room in these highly medicalized centers.
Yes.
Right. And so
ultimately, this was a very good option for him and for my mother-in-law, though. It's close to her house, and she is very satisfied.
Right. So you feel like he's getting good care.
Definitely.
Optimum care for him anyway.
Yes.
That's really good. How expensive is it? Do you know? I mean,
I couldn't tell you exactly.
Right.
It is affordable for their income.
Okay. Yeah. So it doesn't feel like it's a huge financial burden.
It is not a burden, no.
Okay. That's good. That's great. Yeah, that's good to know because I know that facilities and that sort of care in the U.S. is sometimes extremely expensive.
Yes. I think that my mother-in-law, The things that she likes about this facility are that the individualized care is very good, especially as his Alzheimer's advances. He has a very distinct personality now, and she feels that the caregivers are paying attention to that, and that they know him well, they respect his needs, and she's very happy with that part. There is also support for her as a caregiver, which has been very important. I think some of it is there's a chaplain, for example, but also they encourage sort of informal meetings among the caregivers. This was, of course, before COVID started.
Right.
But there were plenty of opportunities to, if you were interested, join sort of associations of Alzheimer's caregivers and then get support.
Right.
Of various kinds.
Right.
Yeah.
So before he went into this center, did he get nursing care at home at all, or was his wife pretty much in charge?
That is right, yes. He needed someone to come and help with sort of daily hygiene, and I believe that was twice a week. He was also able to have sort of a caretaker come, and then my mother-in-law could have 2 hours of freedom to go do things she needed to do, shopping or medical appointments, but someone would come and stay with him. He also had, at one point, the opportunity to go to a care center for the day, so they would come and pick him up, and he could spend the day in a dementia or Alzheimer's location.
Right,
so those were...
I would assume that would be really startling to somebody who has Alzheimer's to be somewhere strange.
That did not really work for him, no.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
It helped my mother-in-law cope.
Of course. And this business of having somebody come stay with him in his home for a couple of hours, was that something she could do several times a week?
It was not enough, but it was helpful. And sometimes she would stay there at the same time. It just freed her up to do things she needed to do, or even get rest. Just before he went into the care facility, he was not sleeping at night, and it was really impacting her own health. Of
course. Yeah, that's a terrible, very, very difficult situation to cope with. I can't imagine. So overall, can you talk to the differences between growing old in the U.S. and in France, as far as you can tell?
Well, my mother had a medical emergency about 18 months ago, and I went over to the States to help with that, and many things such as home visits were not covered by her insurance plan at all. So I have not been in the American, let's say, insurance system for the last, say, 30 years. So a lot of things that I suggested to my family, we could get this to help her or something, they said, well, this is not going to be covered. Oh. And it was kind of very frustrating to me. I remember, for example, she needed to be transferred from one rehab center to another, and she was not mobile at the time. She was in a wheelchair, and the transfer was not covered by ambulance. Wow. And I couldn't imagine that she would just be, the nurse, basically hurt her back, putting my mother into the car, and I drove her to the rehab center, and then another nurse, reached in, and it was really not adapted whatsoever to my mother's health needs, nor the caretaker's needs.
Right.
So that, for example, in France is, it's just ordinary that you get a medical taxi or an ambulance for this kind of...
Yes, in France, as soon as you have a long-term disability or even if it's a short-term disability, you can ask your doctor to write you a prescription so you can get a medical taxi or an ambulance, depending on your needs. And I was shocked when I moved to France from the U.S. I'm French originally, but I lived in the U.S. for 16 years and in the U.K. for 2 years. And so when I moved back to France, my daughter had juvenile arthritis at the time, and it's completely resolved, but it was an issue. And I remember, so we had care for that in the U.S., and the American doctor wrote a prescription for her to see a doctor, his kind of equivalent doctor in France. And the first thing they told me is, if you cannot bring her to the appointments, we will send a nurse and a taxi to pick her up. And I was shocked. I was like, what? I'll bring my daughter to the appointments, but it's a big deal here that you get the care you need, and they will send a taxi to pick you up. And these people are trained to do these sorts of transfers. So and this is not something I know that can happen in the U.S. As far as I know, no insurance pays for that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah. So what about the language problems? Do you think that an American who moves to France in their older year and then may learn some French but is not fluent, would that be a problem?
I would think that would be a problem. I can give you a personal story. It is a neighbor of my mother-in-law who is American, and his father came over to live with him after his mother passed. The father had a small amount of French, but as he grew older, he needed to be in a retirement home, not in an APAD, a hospitalization sort of situation. And it was an utter failure. The elderly parent could not cope, and eventually had to return to the States to live with family there.
Right, that would be really hard. If you don't speak French, I think that would not be advisable.
And I think it's not just the language, but especially also the culture. The food might not be recognizable, the hygiene routines, that sort of thing too might be very confusing to an older person. Again, I could comment that my mother was in a rehab center in the States, and in this particular rehab center there were many elderly Korean people, and there was actually a wing of the rehab. This was in Washington area, which was staffed by Korean nurses to communicate better with the elderly patients.
Wow.
So this is an issue in the center where my father-in-law is. There is one patient of probably Vietnamese origin, and there are obvious communication problems now that she is elderly and suffering from Alzheimer's.
Yes. Yes, that's something to consider, definitely, because it would be so hard to be in a... So I guess if you move to France young enough that you have time to adjust to the culture and to the language and to all of that, then it wouldn't be so startling. But if you come... but if you come in, in your 70s or 80s, it would be weird, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, then maybe it's a little too late to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Carolyn. It's been really good to talk to you and hear how things go from your perspective, because this is not... I think this is something people worry about a lot.
Yes.
But they don't really know who to talk to. So thank you so much for offering your help there.
Exactly. It's been my pleasure.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Bonjour, Julia, and welcome to Join Us in France.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I'm very happy that you agreed to talk to me, because you worked at a French nursing home or a long-term facility for a time, and I'm really curious how that went for you and how you feel it goes for the residents.
I was hired because I have a background in music therapy, and they were looking for an animatrice, sort of an activities manager.
Yeah.
And they liked the fact that I had done all my thesis work on Alzheimer patients.
Uh-huh.
And the population I really like to work with are the elderly. So anyway, to make matters short, I was hired part-time and was given basically free rein to do what I wanted, which was to play music.
Mm-hmm.
So I mainly played music for them. I play violin. So I would play all the oldies but goldies and have them sing along. And sometimes with the Alzheimer patients, I would do rhythm exercises.
Excellent, yeah.
And then just get a few instruments together, very easy instruments like drums and recorders, and have them make all the noise they wanted.
So what?
Then
Sorry, go ahead.
But then I did other stuff too. With the Alzheimer patients, we made crepe and with the non-Alzheimer patients, I set up a café philo where we would just discuss topics like, do you stop learning something when you're old? And what is happiness? I tried to keep positive. Sometimes I did art projects, but I'm not very manual.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that for 2 years.
Okay. So what is it like, do you think? First of all, were all your patients French, or did you have different nationalities?
If I remember correctly, they were all French, but they might have been first generation or people who had migrated, who had come to France at an early age.
Yeah.
So sometimes there were language difficulties. That's true. But my idea was to have activities which didn't necessarily use language.
Yeah. So do you think it would be a bad idea or a good idea for somebody whose first language is English and maybe has limited French? Would they find the long-term facility experience difficult?
Possibly, but as I said, I would suggest activities that aren't so verbal.
Yeah.
I don't know whether in the big groups, there are different types of EHPAD in France. There are the big groups, whose name I won't mention, and there's the smaller ones, which are more associations, like the one I worked for,
mm-hmm.
where we had more time to be individual, have individual activities. I don't know about language skills of the other animateurs.
Right.
But I did things also like massaging hands, and that's where we would just chit-chat. So if an English speaker came to an EHPAD and they were lucky enough to find someone who spoke English,
mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty rare to be honest.
Yeah.
Then there would be other things, singing.
Yeah.
Maybe not the café philo, but singing and artwork.
Yeah, they
there
can
would
do
be things to do.
Yeah. So would you say that EHPAD in France are run well generally, and that, I mean, what is it like?
Well, in my EHPAD, there weren't very many people, but among the staff, there were 21 nationalities. So it was a very diverse group. Ours was run pretty well. The director, when I first started, was someone who really believed heart and soul in making the residents feel comfortable,
mm-hmm.
and to have them be comfortable, participate. There were lots of family gatherings, family events,
mm-hmm.
and we would give concerts every week, or show films. And, they're
Yeah.
well run
Yeah. Well,
in general.
that's good to know. So you didn't want to mention the name of the big EHPAD kind of companies. Why is that? Do you not like them as much?
No, I don't. Not at all. There's one EHPAD I applied to where they would only show the best, entre guillemets, the best patients, residents' work, and everything else was sort of in the basement, i.e. Alzheimer patients. And I really didn't like that attitude of showing off. And the other one was it's a big industry.
Yeah.
It was
I think it would be good if
profit.
Yeah, I think it would be good if you would name them so that the listeners know what we're talking about.
Okay, the place where the place at my risque et péril.
Yeah.
The one where I applied was part of the group Orpea.
Okay.
ORPEA, and the other one, which I think is just a big industry, is Corian.
I see. And is that CORIAN?
No, c'est KORIAN.
Okay. All right. See, I don't know anything about this industry, so those names are not familiar to me.
Okay. And the group that I worked for was a lot smaller, and I think more on a human scale. It's called ISATIS. ISATIS.
Okay. Well, that's really helpful because then people can look them up and see, for themselves what opinion they, look them up if they would like to. So
of course, yes, but I definitely feel that ISATIS was on a more human scale. I mean, there were about 89 residents, and it was joyful. For instance, on Tuesday lunchtime, I would go around to the tables playing music because in the morning I would go floor to floor and play for the residents, and sometimes they would sing along, and sometimes they would dance.
That's fun. That sounds like fun.
Yeah, and there was one resident who had Alzheimer's in quite an intense way, used to be a pianist. So I would take her in the evenings to the piano we had, and she would sit down, and Alzheimer begun, she would sit down and just play and play. It's great.
That's great.
And, the nurses were a good group. The aides-soignantes were very loving. And we celebrated birthdays, not day by day, but all the residents who had a birthday, let's say in the month of April, at some point we would have a lunch where they would be at a special table.
That's cool.
And it was family.
Yeah. So overall, do you think in France, overall, I'm not talking about these facilities in particular, but do you think in France we take good care of the elderly, or do we have do we have to make a lot of progress?
Well, there's always room for progress, of course, but I think the elderly are well taken care of.
That's good.
Actually, there's a lot of benefits, and health benefits, and social benefits. So there's one less worry about how things are going to wind down or wind up, depending. And I think this is a good place to become old.
That's good. Well, thank you so much, Julia, for talking to me, and thank you for sharing your impressions, because, like I said, I have very little experience with this. And I think there are a lot of people who listen to this podcast who are considering maybe moving to France and getting old in France. And so it's good for them to hear this sort of testimonial. Thank you very much, Julia.
You're most welcome.
Au revoir.
Bye-bye.
Again, I want to thank my patrons for supporting the show and giving back. Patrons get several exclusive rewards for doing that. You can see them at patreon.com/join us, Patreon. Join us, no spaces or dashes. Thank you all for supporting the show. Some of you have done so for a long time. You are wonderful. And a shout out this week to new patrons, Debbie Hammack, Cheryl Matzker, Ray P., Monique Roy, Timothy Dias, Wendy Weasel Bosworth, and Colleen Dorr. Thank you so much for becoming patrons and making this podcast possible. I wish I understood better what makes patrons pull the trigger. I wonder if it's something I say or a topic we discuss. If you know, drop me a line. Annie@joinusinfrance.com. And for your French tip of the week, I have a fun French expression for you today. Faut pas pousser. You have a direct equivalent in English. Don't push it. Faut pas pousser. But in French, we add some flair to it. We usually say, faut pas pousser mamie dans les orties. And also, faut pas pousser le bouchon trop loin. Faut pas pousser mamie dans les orties is literally, don't push grandma into the stinging nettles. No, really, don't do it. Faut pas pousser mamie dans les orties. Or, faut pas pousser le bouchon trop loin. This one has to do with one of our favorite pastimes in France, pétanque. When playing pétanque, someone throws a bouchon. We also say a cochonnet. Usually you throw it 5 to 10 meters away, and everybody needs to get their boule as close to the bouchon as possible, right? I think you call that a jack in English. So, faut pas pousser le bouchon trop loin means don't throw the jack too far. So, here are your 3 ways to say don't push it in French. Number 1, faut pas pousser. Number 2, faut pas pousser mamie dans les orties. And number 3, faut pas pousser le bouchon trop loin. This week in French news, there's been a tightening of rules for travelers in and out of France. There's been travel restrictions since March, as you know, but those restrictions typically only applied to foreigners who wanted to come to France, right? A French national who lives anywhere in the world could fly to France. An American living in France could also go to the US and come back to France based on their residency card. That's over for now. French people who reside in America can only come back to France for a few imperative reasons, and they will need to provide written documentation. There isn't an exhaustive list of good reasons, but we have an idea of what's going to fly. So an imperative medical reason, the death of a parent or family member in direct line. That person has to return to France for legal reasons or went bankrupt. Permanent move to France is also a good reason. But how are they going to make you prove that it's permanent? I'm not sure, but they will ask for a lot of paperwork. To protect the well-being of a child or escape abuse from a family member. That's also good reasons. So French citizens can go between EU countries with a negative PCR test. Some countries will be, more restrictive than others. And so just if you're going to be traveling, you're going to have to check into all of that yourselves. Large indoor malls will have to close except for their grocery store if they have one, which most malls in France have. The grocery store is an anchor of that mall. And that includes famous stores like the Galeries Lafayette in Paris, but it's only temporary. It will be reassessed every week. So we'll see how long that lasts. Businesses are encouraged to do more telecommuting, which is not something that French people want more of, unfortunately. There will be more enforcement of the rules. I've seen zero enforcement where I live the last few months, none since March. The cops will be asked to be a little bit more aggressive, especially against folks who organize parties and thumb their noses at the rules. Schools are staying open for now. I hope that continues. The goal is to vaccinate as many people as possible before new variants settle in. Vaccination efforts are proceeding, but it's not going as fast as we'd like here either. We're going to have to remain patient and stay safe. This week, as announced, I cooked rougail saucisse. But I didn't write it up yet, so I didn't send it to my patrons, but I will. I think I'll start sending recipes to my patrons without the historical write-up, because that's what takes me the longest. So that was last week. And next week, I'm going to do the famous French poule au pot. It's something that is very popular in some parts of France, not so much in Toulouse. I'm going to make one and see if I can convince my husband that we need that every Sunday, because that was the original intent, is that every French person was supposed to have a chicken on Sunday. So this week, I usually tell you about a book set in France that I read, and this week I didn't finish it. I'm in the middle of something called The Paris Predicament. It's okay. I don't think it has a lot to do with France. It is set in Paris. But it's one of those books where all the protagonists are Americans, except for, the people that they run into in the streets. And so it's not really like French life. But, so far so good. A little before Christmas, I asked members of the Join Us in France close group on Facebook to tell me the one place in France where they want to go when travel is open again. I counted it all up, and here's what you said. Most of you still want to go to Paris, but a lot of you also want to go to Provence, which is not so surprising, and Normandy, which is not so surprising. But what was wonderful is that a lot of you, as many of you, want to go to Provence as want to come visit the Toulouse area. And I think I might have a little bit of an influence on that. And I'm delighted because it's a beautiful part of France that is not as well known. And so it's going to be wonderful to maybe do get-togethers with you when you come visit. If you enjoy the show, introduce a friend to the podcast and show them how to listen. We're everywhere, and you're my only advertising. Word of mouth is how we do it here. Next week on the podcast, an episode with Elise about La Rochelle, a beautiful, beautiful part of France that we both enjoy very much. And for some reason, we haven't talked about a lot of these beautiful cities on the west coast of France. And so we're preparing more episodes about that. Send questions or feedback to Annie@joinusinfrance.com. Thank you so much for listening. And I hope you join me next time so we can look around France together. Au revoir. The Join Us in France travel podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2021 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.